Good evening, friends. Tonight we are going to be studying chapters 4 and 5 of Masechtas Beitza. Tonight's class is dedicated in loving memory of my dear mother, Rivka Bas Rav Shleimai. I want to start out by wishing everyone well, and may everyone stay healthy. And those who need a refuah shalema should have a refuah shalema, and a good chodesh to one and all. At the end of last chapter, in chapter 3 of Masechtas Beitza, we were discussing things that are not Yom Tov-like. And so this Perak continues where the previous Perak left off. A person who's carrying pitchers from one place to another. When we say from one place to another, this means not within his own house. Says the Mishna, he may not carry pitchers of wine in a basket or in a hamper. Or the intention here is when a person is carrying large cases of wine, it seems like it's more of a commercial activity, which is not Yom Tov-like. And being that that's the case, the Mishnah prohibits this. Avol, maybe but he can carry a few jugs on his shoulder or before him. The intention of the Mishnah is not necessarily of how many jugs, but just the manner in which he's carrying it. In the prior manner, it's more of a commercial manner. It looks like he's going to sell them in the market, which is not a Yom Tov-like activity. Similarly, a person who's carrying straw, he cannot lower the basket or the hamper of straw behind him, but he can carry it in his hands. And again, the intention here of the Mishnah is that a person should not do this in a manner which seems like it's ordinary day-to-day activity, but it's Yom Tov today, and so we want to constantly be reminded that it's Yom Tov, and we want people to see us, to recognize that it's Yom Tov, and not to think that this is a day-to-day activity. Now, we can begin using a stack of straw when you have a bundle of straw, and you want to start it so it's not an issue, because you're going to use the straw to feed your domesticated animals. But eitzim, wood that was in the muktzah, I guess in today's modern day, it would be something like in the garage out back. The garage out back was not meant, would not really store firewood, but rather it would store wood that you need for buildings, for building and construction, and other scrap wood would typically be found in a storage shed or a garage out back. And this area was called the muktzah. In the front of the house there was a chutzner, there was a courtyard, and people would go through the chutzner often, and so things that they needed on a regular basis were left there. Other items that were needed on a more infrequent manner were left in this garage called the muktzah. Muktzah literally means set aside. And so the idea of the Mishnah here is that wood that's in the muktzah is typically construction wood. And so it's actually muktzah. It's set aside for non-firewood uses. And so therefore, one may not make use of it on Yom Tov because it's muktzah literally, and it's also muktzah in the colloquial sense, meaning to say it was set aside from use. Mishnah Beis, we don't take wood from a hut, we don't detach wood from a hut. This, of course, would be falling under the category of destruction, and one is not allowed to destruct on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Now, when we say sukkah here, it's important that we clarify that we're not talking about a sukkah like we have on sukkahs, because that's obvious. It's obvious that you can't take apart a sukkah or detach things from a sukkah on sukkahs. Because what's more, not only can't you do that on the Yom Tov of Sukkot, but even on Chol HaMoed Sukkot, you cannot take apart a sukkah. You can't destruct the sukkah even on Sukkot. Chakas Sukkah is Shivas Yomim LaHashem. The sukkah is for a 7-day holiday. And so therefore, even if you're done with the sukkah, you can't take it down on Chol HaMoed. And certainly not on the Yom Tov itself. So again, when we're talking about sukkah here, we're talking about a literal sukkah in the sense of a hut, not in the colloquial term of sukkahs for a sukkah for sukkahs. But you can indeed take wood that is not attached to the hut, but that is just near the hut or leaning against the hut. Why? Because again, it's not attached to it and there's no issue of destruction. You can carry wood from an open field, provided that it was gathered together in a pile before Yom Tov, and so therefore it's not muktzah, it's not set aside, it's not put away, or it's not, but rather here it's actually prepared. And from an enclosure, a karpef, we've discussed this in Mesechus Eruvin, a karpef, this term, from an enclosure, even if it was scattered around. Ezeo karpef, what is a karpef? Kol shesamach le'er. In this sense, anything that is near the town, within 70 amas, and a little bit of the town, then it is considered in the karpef area of the town, and even if it is mefuzer, even if it's not gathered before Yom Tov, it's still acceptable to take this wood for fire. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. This is what Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Yossi says, "Kol shenichnosim lebifisachas." Any area which in order to open it you need a key. Even if it's within the Tchum Shabbos, meaning to say it's further than the karpef area, it's further than 70 amas, but it's up to 2,000 cubits beyond the city limits. Nevertheless, so long as it's an enclosure that one opens with a key, that's considered min hamucham, that's considered prepared from beforehand, and it is acceptable to be used as firewood on Yom Tov. Gimel. Ein mevakim eitzim, we may not split wood, lei menakeres, neither from beams. Let's say you had an oversized beam in your house, and you don't need the whole beam to support the house. So you figure, you know what, now's a good time, it's Yom Tov, I need some wood. I can shave off some of that wood and use it as firewood. Says the Mishna, you can't do that. What's more, even if the actual beam had broken on Yom Tov and it's no longer supporting the house, and it's no longer built into the house, nevertheless, you cannot cut off a piece from this piece of wood, from this beam that broke on Yom Tov for firewood. And even the items that you can, the wood that you can go ahead and break, you can't break it loy bekardam, you can't split it not with an axe, you can't cut it with a saw, nor with a sickle, but rather with a butcher's cleaver. And again, the reason for this is that all of the prior ways of doing this would be considered too much of a weekday activity, whereas using a kofitz, which is a butcher's cleaver from the front end, this is not a normal way of splitting wood, and so it's enough of a deviation from the normal practice to be used on Yom Tov. A shed, a room, that was filled with produce, and it was closed, and then it opened on Yom Tov. Says the Mishnah, even though it was literally set aside to not be used on Yom Tov. Why? Because it was closed. It was closed up. It was sealed in this room. Nevertheless, since it's already opened, you can't break further, but wherever your hands can reach from the area of the breach, that would be acceptable. Rabbi Meir says, he argues with this, he says, you can even break it up initially, and take out your produce from there. Now the Gemara on Lamed Aleph Amud Beis clarifies the scenario in which this Mishnah is referring to. The Mishnah said, the Gemara explains that it's talking about where bricks were laid over the entrance to this room, and it was sealed up with bricks, but there was no mortar involved. And so it's only a rabbinical decree, because this is not a normal way of construction. Normally when you seal something, you seal it with brick and mortar. And in this particular case, it was only sealed with bricks. And so there's a rabbinic decree not to, according to the first Tana here, you can't lechatchila break into this. But what you can do is you can, if it breaks on its own, you can go in. Rabbi Meir says because it wasn't cemented with mortar, so you can even lechatchila open this up. Dalet, you cannot take a lump of clay and hollow it out so that now you can use this as a lamp. And the reason for this is because he's fabricating a vessel, and one is not allowed to fabricate a vessel on Yom Tov. Nor are you allowed to make charcoal on Yom Tov. It's also considered a vessel. And you cannot take a wick, which is long, and then cut it into two and use it for two different lamps. Rabbi Yehuda says, you can cut the wick, not in a normal fashion, but you can go ahead and cut the wick over the fire. And then you can use those wicks for two different candles. We're continuing Masechtas Beitza Perek Daled Mishna Hey. Ein shevrin es hacheres. You cannot break a shard. We're talking about a vessel, and you break. The idea here is that a person would break this shard, and he would put in a piece of fish or whatever it is on this shard, and then put the shard onto the grill. And the idea would be so that the fish doesn't stick to the grill. So you can now easily remove the piece of fish from the shard. So it says the Mishnah, you can't break a shard, nor can you cut a piece of paper in order to to roast something in an oven. The ain gefrin. So in other words, because you're creating a vessel of sorts, and because of that, you can't do it on Yom Tov. The ain gefrin tanur, you cannot rake a tanur v'charayim, an oven or a double stove on Yom Tov. The intention here is if the plaster on the roof falls down, and now you want to put food into the oven, so you cannot rake the contents of the broken pieces off to the side. I'm sorry. But what you could do is you could level it so that it's now flat and you could put your food on top of it. Nor may you position two barrels near each other in order to set a pot upon them. You're creating a makeshift stove. You're taking two barrels, you're putting them next to each other, you're going to make a fire underneath, and then the fire underneath is going to warm the pot that's hanging over these two barrels. Says the Mishnah, you're not allowed to do that. This is somewhat of construction. You cannot support a pot with a piece of wood. If a pot is tilting a little bit, you can't take a shard of wood and jam it underneath in order to balance it. Nor can you do this with a door. You can't, in other words, you can't take wood and use it for other purposes other than for lighting a fire. And in these two cases, what you're doing is you're balancing out a pot, or you're balancing out a door that needs a shim. Nor can you take a stick and drive an animal with it. And the reason again is because it looks like you're taking it towards the market, and it's not a Yom Tov-like activity. It looks like you're treating Yom Tov with disrespect. Rabbi Eliezer ben Rabbi Shimon mater. Rabbi Eliezer ben Shimon permits leading a behemoth with a stick. Vav. Rabbi Eliezer says, person who's in his house and he has firewood there, he could pull off a little splinter of the firewood and fix his teeth and pick his teeth using it as a toothpick. He can take hay or splinters or little twigs from his courtyard of the front of his house and use it to light a fire. Obviously here we're talking about, as the Mishna is going to explain soon, you're not allowed to light a fire, you're not allowed to ignite a fire on Yom Tov, but you can pass a fire from one place to the next. So here what the Mishna is telling us is that you can gather these fragments, these twigs and these little splinters from your courtyard and use it to start a fire, because it's easier to start a fire with small twigs and so forth. And little scraps. And the reason for this is that everything that's in your courtyard is considered prepared from before Yom Tov. Even though you didn't gather it together before Yom Tov, nevertheless, because it's in your courtyard, it's automatically considered prepared. The Chachamim say, he can gather that which is before him and he can use it to start the fire. Now, to understand here, the Chachamim are arguing with Rabbi Eliezer in 2 points. One is that they hold that you can only gather that which is in the house, not that which is in the courtyard. That's one point. Rabbi Eliezer, said that even what's in the courtyard is already considered prepared. The sages dispute this. Only that which is in your house. And the second thing is that the Chachamim are also disputing the earlier notion that you can take a piece of wood that's in your house and use the piece to pick your teeth as a toothpick. The Chachamim likewise disagree with this, and so they only say the only thing that they allow is that within your house you can gather the little fragments to start a fire, because they can see that is considered prepared before Yom Tov. Zion. You cannot produce fire, which means you cannot ignite fire, not from wood. You can't take wood and bang it together and create a fire from that. Certainly can't do it not from wood and not from banging stones together. When earth is packed tightly and you knock a shovel in it, it creates a spark. And if you have something combustible there, you can start a fire that way. It says the Mishna, you're not allowed to do that. And then you can't use water to start a fire. What this means is that when you have water in a see-through cup or a see-through bag, you put it in the sun, it creates a fire. And you're not allowed to do that on Yom Tov. You're not allowed to ignite a fire. And you cannot heat tiles in order to roast upon them. The Gemara clarifies that we're talking about new tiles, in which now new tiles, it's required, you need to kiln them or fire them up again in order to make them hard. And by you using them to roast upon them, you're putting them on top of a grill and you're putting food on top of it, while you're roasting on the grill, you're also hardening and finishing the construction of these tiles. And so that's called maka b'patish in Mishnaic terms, which means delivering the final blow. You're completing the construction of this item, the fabrication of this item, I should say. And so that's not allowed. Rabbi Eliezer also says, Adam ala muktzah, a person can stand on the muktzah. In this particular case, muktzah means he's standing on his roof, or in an area where he has food that's lying out to dry, whether it's figs or grapes or whatever it might be. And he can stand, but now these are, why are they muktzah? Why are they set aside? They're set aside to dry in the sun. So says the Mishnah, a person could stand next to these, which are laid aside for sun being dried in the sun. Erev Shabbos, Friday during the sabbatical year, and say, from here I will eat tomorrow. The Chachamim meimrim, and the Chachamim say, Ad sheyirsham yemer mikan v'ad kan. Only if he marks it off, and he says, from here and on, I will eat. So, in order for, people do not usually tithe before it's ready for consumption, but in this particular case, it's ready for consumption, it's just set aside for drying, and so it's edible, and so by once he marks off where he is going to identify where the fruit he intends to eat, then it's a sufficient marker that he's resolved that he's going to eat this on Shabbos. And so it's min hamuchon, it's prepared from beforehand, and he can eat this on Shabbos. We are moving on to chapter 5, and the final chapter of Mesechtas Beitza, Aleph. Mashilin Peres derech haruba v'yengtiv. A person could lower produce through a skylight on Yom Tiv. Avalei Shabbos, but not on Shabbos. The Mishnah is telling us a person laid fruits or other items to dry on his roof. And now the easiest way for him to get it into his house is by lowering it through the skylight. So this is considered not a Shabbos-like activity, but on Yom Tiv, this is nevertheless, he's allowed to do this. Now, the idea in the Mishnah here is that large-scale moving of produce is considered an excessive exertion, and it's prohibited on Shabbos, but if usually this is done before it's going to rain, and so if it's going to rain, it's going to ruin the produce, and so but on Yom Tif it's allowed so that he can save himself from this loss, and it's not considered. He's just dropping it in, and so it's not considered such a great exertion on Yom Tif. I believe on Shabbos, but not on Shabbos. And a person can cover produce with drop cloths, with protective cloths, because of dripping water. So if a person has a leak and water is leaking onto water is leaking onto it, even though he was not interested in necessarily eating this fruit on Yom Tiv, nevertheless he can save the fruit by covering it. Similarly, we can cover pitchers of wine and pitchers of oil. Now, pitchers of wine and pitchers of oil, what's the intention here? Why should they be muktzah in the first place? In the first case, the Mishnah, in the earlier case, we're talking about food that he set aside to dry and he has no plans on eating it, so it's muktzah. Kadayayin and kadeshemen, the Gemara explains that we're talking about that they're tevel, meaning to say that they were not the requisite truma and meiser were not removed from it, and now we have already learned previously together that you're not allowed to take trumas and meisers off of food on Yom Tiv. So if the food is tevel, there's no way of rectifying it on Yom Tiv. And so therefore, it's muktzah, nevertheless, you can cover it and save it from getting ruined. Furthermore, and you can put a vessel under a dripping water on Shabbos. An empty container can be put under the leak in your roof on Shabbos to prevent water from dripping all over the place. Beis. Kol shechayavim olav mishum shvus, mishum rishus, mishum mitzvah, v'shabbos chayavim olav v'yantiv. Anything that a person would be, whatever you're required to do on Shabbos, because of a rabbinic injunction, because of a rishus, so anything that's, it's an allowable thing generally, but we don't do it on Shabbos. And the Mishna is going to clarify what we're talking about later. So let's just give the literal translations here. One, because of you're required to abstain from it on Shabbos because of a rabbinic injunction. Well, a rishus, a non-mandatory mitzvah, mishum mitzvah, or another thing which we don't do. It's a mitzvah, but we don't do it on Shabbos. Chayavim olav yantif. So the same rule applies on yantif as well. These are the things that are not allowed because of rabbinic injunction. A person is not allowed to climb on a tree on Yom Tov, just like he's not allowed to climb a tree on Shabbos. He's not allowed to ride on ride on an animal. He cannot swim in an open water because we're afraid he's going to create a raft. So just like you're not allowed to do that on Shabbos, you're not allowed to do that on Yom Tov. You're not allowed to clap your hands nor slap your thighs, nor dance on Shabbos nor on Yom Tov. Now it's interesting, although the Mishnah prohibits this, the Shulchan Aruch allows this. And so the common custom is to clap on Shabbos, and Chassidim even clap regularly, and we dance on Shabbos and rejoice on Shabbos. The original injunction was to prevent somebody from getting into the spirit of dancing and music, and then perhaps start to play a musical instrument, which will then have a string or something else, a skin that will break, and then the person will go ahead and fix it on Shabbos. So in order to avoid that, we don't allow musical singing and dancing, musical dancing and clapping on Shabbos. But again, in today's day and age, we do not follow this halacha in our day and age. And so we clap and we dance and so on and so forth. So these are things that, in any case, these are items that are prohibited on Shabbos, says the Mishnah, and likewise they're prohibited on Yom Tov. And these are allowable things that we don't do on Shabbos. We do not judge, don't hold court on Shabbos and not on Yom Tov. We do not betroth a woman on Shabbos or on Yom Tov. We do not perform chalitza, and we do not perform the Yavama ceremony. So what is Yavama and what is chalitza? Yavama is if a person marries a woman and he has no children and then he passes away. So the woman now is supposed to marry her brother-in-law, one of her brother-in-laws, usually the oldest brother-in-law. Now, if she doesn't want to marry him or if he doesn't want to marry her, so they perform a chalitza ceremony where she removes his shoe, and it's an elaborate ceremony as discussed in Parshas Kiseitze. In any case, any of these items, they're mitzvahs. All these are mitzvahs to do, but we don't do them on Shabbos and we don't do them on Yom Tov. These are allowable things. They're not a mitzvah. You're not commanded, go ahead and do this. When you have an issue that needs adjudication, so then you go ahead and you judge. When you want to marry a woman, so then you go and you marry a woman. When you need to do chalitza, you do it. When you need to do yibum, you do it. But it's not something that a person on an ordinary basis is commanded to do. So they're rishus, they're permissible things, permissible level mitzvahs. These are mitzvahs to actually perform. We do not consecrate items for the Beis Hamikdash. and we do not make an erech vow. So you say the value of such and such person is on me, and then you have to pay the value of that person. You don't make a cherem dedication, which you make a cherem and then it goes to the Beis Hamikdash. As we mentioned earlier, you don't separate tithes, and you do not separate the truma on Yom Tov because it's being misakin. You're fixing the food. All these things that we were discussing, we're talking about Yom Tov. Certainly on Shabbos we don't do any of these things. Now the Mishnah continues, there's no difference in halacha between Yom Tov and Shabbos, except for that which is necessary for the preparation of food. Okay. Habehema. Now here we're going to get into the laws of Tchum, Shabbos, and Yom Tov. So now Tchum Shabbos means that a person cannot go more than 2,000 cubits beyond his city limits unless he makes a Tchum Shabbos, unless he makes an Erev Tchumen. So an Erev Tchumen is he puts food stuff anywhere between the edge of his city and 2,000 cubits, and that extends it an additional 2,000 cubits from where he put his food stuff and has established camp, quote unquote, before Shabbos or Yom Tov. So now, so now on Shabbos, he himself can go past this area. But now the question is a person's animals and a person's kalim, which can be carried on Yom Tov or led on Yom Tov, is like the feet of the boilim. So which means the owner, whoever owns it, whatever he owns, wherever he's allowed to go to, that's as far as his property can go. Which means, for example, let's say a person lives in a house and in a city, and he doesn't make an Erev Tchumen. But his neighbor makes an Erev Tchumen 2,000 cubits to the north of the city. So now his neighbor can go an additional 2,000 cubits further than he can. So now his items, his vessels, and his animals cannot be taken by his neighbor past the Tchum that would apply to him, even though his neighbor is allowed to go further because his neighbor had made an Erev Tchumen. But since the owner of these items did not, so therefore these items are bound by wherever the person who owns it can go. Now, similarly, if a person entrusts his animals to his son or to his shepherd, so it does not change owners, and so therefore the owner, wherever the owner can go, that's where his items can go. It has not transferred to another person. But if he actually gave them to his friend, so then his friend could, if he gave them to his friend before Shabbos, so now it belongs to his friend. And his friend can take it wherever he wants. A vessel that is particularly designated for one of a number of brothers in a home. So here the case is you have a number of brothers living in the same home, and one of them has something. Let's say, for example, shoes. So shoes is something that people have their own shoes. You don't borrow, you don't wear usually your brother's shoes. So they're designated for one person. So these shoes are now like his feet, which means wherever he can go, that's where his shoes can go. But something that's not designated specifically for one brother, it can go wherever they can all go. Which means if one of the brothers established an Erev, he can take. So, for example, if you have a raincoat, a lot of families have these plastic raincoats, rain smocks. So They don't belong to anybody in the house particularly. They're just there, available for whoever wants it. So such an item can be taken by any of the brothers, and then go wherever each one can go. That's where it can go, because again, it's not designated for one of the brothers. If a person who borrows an item from his friend before Yom Tov, karagli hashoyel, it is like the feet of the borrower. So wherever the borrower is allowed to go, meaning to say if he can go further because of an Eruv Tchumen, then he can go wherever it can go. It could go wherever he goes. Yom Tov, but if he borrows it on Yom Tov, karagli hamashal. So then the domain is not transferred to a different person on Yom Tov, and so the person who it was borrowed from, the lender, the item belongs to him, and so wherever he's allowed to go, his items can go as well. A woman who borrowed from her friend spices, water, and salt for her dough on Yom Tov. So she borrowed items on Yom Tov, but the flour was her own. So now, so now it is it's like both of their feet, which means this is l'chumra. This is for stringency purposes. Meaning to say, can only go where both of them are allowed to go. Rabbi Yehuda says, he disagrees, and he says, when it comes to the water itself, that's not enough of a contribution to a dough in order to make it partially somebody else's, because it doesn't have so much substance. It's just water, and it's not important enough to create this joint ownership and disallow it to go where the owner of the dough is going. Mishna Hey, burning coal is like the feet of its owner, meaning to say, burning coal is owned by a person, and it's a substantial item, and so wherever it's allowed to go, wherever its owner is allowed to go, the burning coal is allowed to go with him, and that's it. It can't go further than where he can go. But the flame can be taken anywhere. And the intention here is not a flame that's attached to something, but with somebody who's blowing a flame and catching something. So if a person is at the end of his tchum, he can't wave the flames to catch something that's right beyond. He can wave he can wave the flame so that it catches something further than the tchum. So again, this is an interesting, weird case here. The person is literally at the very border of where he's allowed to go. And just beyond this border of where he's allowed to go is something else. And he wants to catch the fire past the tchum. So says the Mishnah, the fire, when he's waving the fire beyond his tchum, so the flame itself is not substantial enough, and it's not considered that he's moving it beyond the tchum, because it's not a substance that he's moving beyond tchum. Now the Mishnah continues with additional laws about coal and flames. Coal that belongs to the temple treasury, if a person makes use of this for personal use, so it's called me'ila. It's this, you're not allowed to use something that belongs to the temple treasury, and if you do, you have to bring a carbon, and you have to bring a 20% penalty for beyond the value that you have misappropriated. You're misappropriating value from Hegdish, and so it's called me'ila. So says the Mishnah here that coal is substantial enough of an item that it can be considered misappropriation of temple treasury funds. But flame that belongs to that belongs to the temple, the Beitza Mikdash, and you're not allowed to make use of it. But if you did go ahead, it's not considered me'ila. You don't have to bring a carbon, and you don't have to pay for it. And again, because it lacks substance. A person who takes out coal from a private domain to a public domain on Shabbos, he's chayev to bring a carbon, chatas. because he's bringing something of substance out from one rishus, from one domain to another domain. We shall have this potter. But if he causes a fire to go from, again, in the case that we discussed before, from a rishus hayachid into a rishus harabim, so the person is at the edge of his rishus hayachid, and right before, out of the rishus harabim, he blows it to. Now, of course, if he lights something that's beyond, if he's lighting something, he's igniting something. You're not allowed to catch. You're not allowed to ignite something in any place on Shabbos. So obviously that's not the intention here. Here we're just talking about that he causes the flame to go from one domain to another. He's not lighting anything. Don't try this at home, by the way. Even in one domain. But again, here the Mishnah is talking about if a person went ahead and did that. So he's potter because he didn't move something of substance from one rishus to another rishus. A water pit of an individual is like that individual, which means, so a person who owns a pit and has water in it, so the water that's in that pit cannot be taken further than he himself can go. Again, we're talking about a similar case that we were talking about previously in the Perakim, where it's an issue of Tchum Shabbos and Tchum Yom Tov. But if it's a public watering pit, so then it belongs to the public at large, the people, the city dwellers at large, and so therefore, wherever the city dwellers at large can go, that's where the water from this pit can go. Now there was waters and that were water pits that were set up for people who were making pilgrimage from Bavel coming to Yerushalayim, and so these were public. They didn't belong to any city, or they were considered hefker. Anybody was allowed to make use of these water pits. So there's no city with which they are designated to. They're just completely ownerless, not of a person. They're not owned by a person. They're not owned by a person, by a city as well. They're not municipal property. So then the idea is here is that whoever draws water from this public water pit, such a person, water that comes from this pit is whoever draws it, that's however far he can go, that's how far this water can go. In other words, he's acquiring it for himself, and so it becomes his property, and now wherever he can go, this water can go to. Vav. Misha Yoferu Sabir Acheres. So here we're talking about a situation where you have two cities, and let's, for argument's sake, say the cities were 3,000 cubits apart from each other. So ordinarily speaking, city A to city B, you can't travel from one city to the next on Shabbos or Yom Tov without making an Eruv, because if you leave city A to go to city B, once you hit the 2,000 cubit mark, you can't go any further. Now in this instance, city B friends of his from city B made an Eruv at the 2,000 cubit mark. And so they were able to extend their distance of allowable walking an additional 2,000 cubits. Now being that the city A to city B was only 3,000 cubits, so now city B, the people from city B could come all the way into city A, and now they can walk throughout city A. Where city B, where the people from city A cannot go to city B because they did not make this Eruv. So they could only end up 1,000 cubits, I should say, away from the second city. So now let's read the Mishnah again. You have a person who has fruit in a house or wherever it may be in the second city, and the people from the second city made an Eruv in order to bring him his fruits. Says the Mishnah, bottom line, they should not bring him the fruits. But if he also made an Eruv, so his produce is like himself, and so as far as his payers can go, so too he can go. So in such an instance where he also made an Eruv, then they would be allowed to bring him fruits, even though they were in another city. because I guess he can himself go to the other city and get the fruits himself. Misha zimenetz le'erchim, a person who invited guests, lo yoichel v'yadam oines, lo yelichu v'yadam oines. They cannot take with him leftovers, doggy bags. They can't take with them from his house. And the idea is we're talking about a situation that we've been talking about all along, unless they're allowed to walk. In other words, they belong to the owner of the house. And as far as he can walk, that's as far as they can walk with their doggy bags. But if they had made an eruv and extended their allowable distance for them to walk, they can't walk that far. Because again, this is similar to the previous case, because they belong to the owner of the house, and the doggy bag was not given to them until the end of the meal. Unless the owner anticipated such an event, and he was mezakeh them, he gave this to them, and he acquired it for them before Shabbos, saying, "Okay, I'm going to give them these doggy bags, and they're going to, I'm taking ownership for them on their behalf." And so now they belong to them from before Yom Tov. And you could do such a thing. For example, a person wants to give a gift on Yom Tov. You're not supposed to give gifts on Shabbos and Yom Tov. And so, but you can give it, but before Shabbos, you could acquire it on behalf of the person. And so it belongs to them. You can gain something for somebody, you can give a merit to somebody, and give a benefit to somebody even without their knowledge. And so, in this particular case, you're benefiting them by giving them their doggy bags from before Yom Tov. You're designating it for them. And so now it belongs to them. And now they can go wherever they can go. That's where their leftover doggy bags can go with them. You cannot water or slaughter range animals. We're talking about, the Mishna will clarify, but you can water and slaughter domesticated animals. What's considered bayoses, domesticated animals? That's which spend the night in town, in the city. What's considered non-domestic range animals? That which pass the night out in the pasture, out of the town. Slik Maseches Beitza. We have now concluded the Maseches Beitza. Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov. Please join us again next week at 8:30. Hopefully by that time, everyone will be allowed out of the quarantines, and we'll be joining together in shul with our usual crowd. Next week we're going to begin Masechtas Shabbos, which, although we're going out of order in our Seder, in the order of this order of Mishnayos, but we skipped originally Shabbos, Eruvin, and Beitza, and so we're catching up. We're circling around. We have concluded Eruvin, we have concluded Beitza, and next week we will start again Shabbos, and that will conclude, once we finish with Masechta Shabbos, we will be able to conclude the entire Seder of Moed. Have a very, very good evening. Stay healthy, stay safe, stay strong.